First, I want to thank the chair and the ranking member for even scheduling this hearing uh, to give us a chance to look at the broader issues. Lincoln once said, when he was asked what he would do if he was told he had an hour to split a cord of wood, that he'd spend the first 15 minutes sharpening his axe. Most of us would just commence chopping. And today we're having a chance to sharpen our axe, to think about some of these larger strategic issues. And I really appreciate that. General McMaster, it's wonderful to see you again. I still think you've written the very best book on Vietnam that explains what went on. And let me take a page from that book. And both of you touched on this earlier in your discussion. It seems to me that one of the problems with American foreign policy is that we think the rest of the world thinks like us, and that they're going to react like us, and that everything is sort of in a transaction from one minute to the next. And we don't spend enough time understanding the culture and history of our adversaries. General McMaster, do you think that would better inform our foreign policy if we could get into the heads of Xi Jinping or the Taliban or Mr. Putin?
Senator King, thank you for that question. I cover this at some length in the statement for the record, and I think what you're talking about is what the historian Zachary Shore calls strategic empathy, and to pay particular attention to the emotions and the ideology and the aspirations that drive and constrain the other. And I think you're right. We have this tendency towards strategic narcissism, to define the world only in relation to us, which is a problem because it's self-referential, but it also doesn't consider the authorship over the future that the other has. And I think as a result of this strategic narcissism, we oftentimes have implicit and fundamentally flawed assumptions that underpin our policies and strategies. So I think this is a fundamental aspect of strategic competence, is this quality of strategic empathy.
Thank you. I want to move on, and we've talked a lot about cyber. I totally associate myself with Senator Blumenthal and all the others who have talked about cyber deterrence. I've been working, as you know, on the Cyber Solarium Commission for the past 2 years. It's one of our major recommendations. But I want to touch on another theme that's come up a lot today, and that's allies. Deterrence, whatever form it takes, is much more effective if it's done multilaterally rather than unilaterally. This goes for also things.
I think we just lost you. I think you might be muted.
Senator King, we cannot hear you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think I'm okay now. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, please.
Okay. The question is that I wanted to posit to Dr. Wright is talk about the essential quality of allies, which frankly we have. Russia doesn't have much in the way of allies. China has customers, not allies. I think it's a major asset that we should be taking a greater advantage of. Cyber is a perfect example. If you can have worldwide sanctions instead of just U.S. sanctions, I think it would be much more effective. Dr. Wright?
Senator, thank you. I 100% agree. And I'd actually link your second question to your first question, which is I think we also need sort of strategic empathy with allies and partners too, to understand where they're coming from on this. What's happening in Asia is not all about China. It is about our allies and partners as well. And on your second question, precisely, I think when we look at cyber, but we also look at other means of coercion and interference, including, for instance, what is happening currently in Australia, I think a collective response by free societies is incredibly important. And most of the time in this environment, it will be a non-military response. It will be political, diplomatic, economic.
Finally, General McMaster, I want to differ with you a little bit on climate change and the Paris Accords. The Paris Accords were aspirational, not regulatory, as you know. And I agree that there's no teeth there, but at least it was an international recognition of the issue. And you talked about China. China today is the largest user of renewable energy in the world. Yes, they're building coal plants because they have such a high growth in their economy, but they are leading in electric cars and in renewable power. But I want to get to the basic point, which is climate change is an enormous threat to us, and it's one that has to be dealt with internationally. I totally agree with your point that we could do everything here. If China and India don't do anything, it's not going to work. But I think it needs to be acknowledged that other areas of the country are in fact working on limiting CO2 emissions, and that's important to the future of the country. So I'll leave it at that, but I appreciate both of you all being here for the discussion today, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you again for calling this hearing.